I think anytime you share such a massive part of your life and way of living online, you really have to be vulnerable. To me, wearing historical fashion every day has become such a natural part of my world that all the practices that are involved in it have become intrinsic. Before we jump into things, I would like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video, but I'll explain more on that later. Lately, I've been posting these get ready with me style videos over on Instagram and also here on YouTube as shorts. One of the most frequent comments that I've been getting on these videos is something along the lines of, "You must be so uncomfortable," or "I'm so glad that we don't have to wear this anymore," or that people historically must have been so incredibly uncomfortable and miserable. At first, I was a little bit upset about these comments because as much as I try not to take things on the internet personally, to me it just felt like people weren't really getting it. After reflecting a bit deeper, I recognized that if we take historical fashion with all of its layers and apparent superfluousness and then put it under a modern lens, it does seem really uncomfortable and not at all convenient. That's why I felt it was time to make a video about why I find historical fashion more comfortable than modern fashion. I want to make it perfectly clear that this is just my opinion. I always say that I don't think historical fashion is for everybody, and that's okay. We all deserve to have a personal style that suits us and that brings us joy, and that style doesn't need to make sense to anybody else. With that being said though, I think there is a lot that we can learn from historical fashion whether or not we choose to wear it. I think the reason historical fashion is more comfortable in my mind is because I think of the definition of comfort differently. Comfort for me does not equal convenience. It's not being able to get dressed as quickly as possible or wear the least amount of layers. To me, comfort is being able to be prepared for big changes in weather and other unpredictable factors, and also to have systems in place that mean less effort in the long run. It's having that support of structured undergarments because they help to take away physical pain for me. Comfort for me is also about understanding the origins of my clothing and being able to connect deeply with the process of it being made. It's about having a wardrobe that supports my life values. It's a lot like how growing your own food is a lot more effort in the short run, but it's a far more fulfilling and connecting practice than just buying food at the store. That's actually how I got into all this in the first place, is I was really deeply interested in where my food came from, and so I also began to get curious about where my clothes were coming from too. There's an assumption that getting dressed in all of these layers is very time consuming, and I think it really depends on how we look at it. Slow living is something that matters to me an incredibly large amount. When I'm doing something, I don't feel like I'm in a rush to do anything because I'd much rather approach it from a perspective of mindfulness. That way, the time I do spend on an activity, I can truly be present with it and say, looking back upon it, that I was really there, involved in it. I take this same life philosophy and approach it towards getting dressed in the mornings in historical fashion. Each layer I put on becomes a meditative act of self-care, and that to me is comfort because it aligns with my values. And I think this is why I'm also drawn to hand stitching, and I choose not to use sewing machines. You can get lost in the experience of it, and each morning when I get my clothes on, it becomes an experience that sets up my day and sort of explains how I can approach the day and walk through life. On a practical level, realistically, it only takes me about 5 to 10 minutes to get dressed because with practice, you start to get all of the steps down and you get much quicker at it. I also spend very little time on my hair and makeup each day, so I would argue that compared to some people today, I may actually get ready quicker because the main focus of most of my getting ready is actually just getting dressed. Additionally, once I've gotten ready, I am truly ready for any changes in weather or anything that the natural world wants to throw at me. This is also part of why I've really been shifting towards wearing a lot more working class clothing because I find it so much more suited to big changes in environment because people had to work a lot and do a lot of physical labor in these clothes. This is also part of why I'm leaning more towards constructing some of my ethnic dress too. Part of why I love historical fashion and hand sewing is because I absolutely adore learning. That's why when I found out that Skillshare was going to be sponsoring this video, I got extremely excited. A class that I took this month to help me find my voice as a creative and as a content maker is actually by one of my favorite YouTubers, Nathaniel Drew. It's called Creativity Unleashed: Discover, Hone, and Share Your Voice Online. Since I started this YouTube channel a year and a half ago, I feel that my presence on camera has shifted a lot. And a big part of that was being able to overcome fears and get comfortable with being vulnerable on camera. Nathaniel Drew's course dives into these types of themes, and the exercises were honestly very enlightening, reminding me of why I started making content in the first place, and gave me the spark that I needed in order to keep pursuing this creative path. Skillshare is an online learning community that has thousands of inspiring classes for anyone that loves learning, who wants to explore their creativity and discover new skills. Some benefits of Skillshare include that they're ad-free, making it easier than ever to concentrate, and they have additional premium classes launched each week, so there's always something new to discover. Finally, their entire catalog is now available with subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. The fact that you're watching a video right now on historical fashion tells me that you probably also love learning, and that's what makes subscription-based platforms like Skillshare so invaluable. Luckily, Skillshare is offering a 1-month free membership to the first 1,000 people to use the link below. So whilst being able to learn some new skills, you're also going to be supporting my channel, which I'm so incredibly grateful for. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and now back to why I find historical clothing more comfortable than modern. Each layer of a historical fashion ensemble holds a very specific and important purpose, because just like today, people historically were clever, intelligent, and very crafty. Some of the most phenomenal inventions in our modern world were created historically and during a time when we didn't have the things we tend to take for granted today, like the internet and electricity. Were there mistakes made? Definitely. And were there plenty of horrific things that happened historically too? Absolutely. But that doesn't take away from the fact that people historically were also very intelligent and sometimes very forward-thinking. I see that same innovation and intelligence come through when I think about the layers of historical garments. A shift or chemise, for example, is worn as a foundational underlayer that protects your skin from any type of harsh materials on the outside, for example, scratchy wool. It also serves as a way to prevent yourself from having to wash your outer garments as often, because most of the sweat and body odor and everything else gets soaked up into the shift or the chemise. At a time when doing laundry would have been a momentous task, having these foundational undergarments that made it easier to then wash your outer garments less were essential. With ensembles like riding habits, the cravat, for instance, is something that not only does look very fashionable, but in a pinch, if you were to say fall off your horse, you could use it as a sling, or in an emergency, you could use it as a tourniquet. Not to mention the fact that it's protecting the neck from any of the outer layers, again with, say, a scratchy wool. Stays and corsets act as a supportive underlayer to not only carry and evenly distribute the weight of any outer garments, but also to support the back and body during everyday things like physical labor or having to do hard work. I think it speaks volumes that working class women chose to wear stays and corsets even though they were quite expensive, and it wasn't just because that was the societal expectation. They must have also been gaining something from wearing stays and corsets. Outside of stays and corsetry, if the working class wore these types of clothes, well, the working class version of them, then they must not have been that horrifically miserable. I think because of the way that historical fashion is portrayed in media, we tend to only think in the mainstream narrative that everyone wore what the elite did. The elite actually made up a very small minority of people. Additionally, this is also an issue because most of the perceptions of what people wore historically come from the lens of Western fashion. That just shows that what is being portrayed is even less of the total population of the world, because not everybody lived in the West. I think one thing in particular that makes people think that historical fashion is very uncomfortable is because of the way hem lengths are portrayed in media. They tend to usually be portrayed as very long and unmanageable or even trained, but the reality is working class people wore actually very short hem lengths, and even in periods where hems were notoriously long, like in the Victorian era. This is a principle that I try to take into my own wearing of historical fashion, and I try to keep my hem lengths very short to make them a lot more manageable, which only adds to that comfort. I think it's also important to remember that these materials were what historically people had to work with at a time before the creation of materials like elastic, which is what we tend to couple with comfort in a modern lens. Whether it be people of the past or present, humans have always wanted to feel comfortable, and that exact same principle is true for people historically. Another reason why I think historical fashion is more comfortable is because it is tailored to seasons and the changing of them. I possess a very different wardrobe depending on the season. For instance, my summer and winter wardrobes are drastically different, different. And then the in-between months, which I call the liminal seasons, like spring and autumn, tend to have more similar wardrobes because they're those transitionary periods between hot and cold weather. Being so connected to the seasonality of clothing not only makes you more connected with the clothes that you wear and where they come from, it also helps you to become more connected with the inevitability of change and transition, which is a natural part of life, and it goes so much further beyond just clothing. This is another point where my fundamental values of life intersect with my practice of wearing historical clothing. Uncertainty is something I've had to get incredibly comfortable with in my life, and those micro transitions in the world, like the changing of the seasons, are a wonderful way for me to practice getting comfortable with change. My clothes serve as a direct reminder of that transition. Really feeling those transitions and changes in such a healthy and conducive way allows me to live a much more content life, which also increases my feelings of comfort. Not to mention that people historically really understood what materials work for what weather conditions. We often forget in a modern context that materials like lightweight wool, for example, are incredible during very hot weather conditions. That's because they breathe so well and they're naturally antimicrobial. I always say that there's a reason why the Bedouin cover themselves from head to toe, often in materials like wool. We can look at their wisdom and impart some of that into our own lives and into our own clothing practices. And it also then helps us understand why people historically wore so many layers in the summer. It wasn't because they were trying to torture themselves. Shopping for modern clothing, I recall it being very difficult to find something that suited my budget, but also was made of natural fibers and wouldn't cause my skin to have an allergic reaction. Then there were issues about quality and making sure that things were made well enough that they wouldn't just break down after a few uses. And then on top of that too, fit is a huge thing because almost nobody is the standard that we tend to see in stores. Wearing historical fashion takes care of all of those things because clothes are made bespoke to your own measurements. You can choose the fibers that they're made of, and garments are altered and mended and repaired and refashioned until there's literally no fabric left to work with and things are just in scraps and beyond repair. All of this allows you to embrace your own unique measurements and your own unique body. This could of course be the case for any home-sewn wardrobe, but this is just another small element as to why I find it so much more comfortable. Not to mention that I never have to worry about being in fashion because my clothes were never in fashion in the first place. Also, because of the undergarments being washed so frequently and the outer garments being washed much more seldomly, there's a lot of other ways to clean your garments, like brushing, spot cleaning, using alcohol spray, and a bunch of other methods that I've actually covered in another video a while back. All of this is arguably a lot more sustainable, and sustainability and treading lightly on this earth and leaving the smallest environmental impact that I can is something that is really important to me, and it's one of my life values. The fact that I'm able to accomplish this with my clothing day to day to the best of my ability is also another added layer of comfort. I guess in this case, it's moral comfort in a sense. So you see, the comfort of historical fashion doesn't just imply physical comfort of the clothing. It goes down deeper to the way that this clothing can begin to make you look at life. It's the way that it connects you to your surrounding world and gets you intimately and deeply involved with the process of making, mending, repairing, and caring for your wardrobe. Comfort isn't just a physical thing. It's also about creating supportive practices that align with our life goals and our values. Practices that help us feel safer in a very uncertain world, so that way we can proceed from a place of more joy, fulfillment, and contentment. If you'd like to hear my opinion on some of the misconceptions of wearing historical fashion every day, be sure to watch this video next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks for another video.